We are approaching the one-year mark of Donald Trump's first term. I should say first year of the second term tomorrow. And the First Amendment has been a big theme. His Justice Department just launched a criminal probe over free speech because of lawmakers and the mayor and the governor of Minnesota said things in public, which the DOJ says they can criminalize. And that includes just discussing current issues and the ICE policies with their constituents.
We have not received a subpoena. And at the same time, if the rumors are true, this is deeply concerning. There are other countries where you get put away for the things that you say. There are other countries where you get investigated for saying something that runs counter to what the federal government states. But in this country, it's not that way. Here we have a freedom of speech, and we do not negotiate those rights away.
No negotiating away free speech rights. We also just saw a judge who happens to have been appointed by Republican Ronald Reagan, ruling against not only President Trump, but how other people in his cabinet engaged in a, quote, unconstitutional conspiracy to pick off certain people during deportations. In other words, targeting them for what they said or believed, not their actual legal status. And that infringes on the First Amendment rights in the United States. There are other ways that Trump is doing this beyond the classic idea of abusing government power to censor. That could be what we saw fail in the effort to get Jimmy Kimmel canceled, or what I just told you about, political operations that are being run through the DOJ to intimidate or even indict and imprison people for their free speech rights. But beyond that, we're seeing Trump also just dial up other activities that may not actually technically violate the First Amendment, because everyone does have a right to sue in this country. That's why we're seen as such a litigious society. But it is at least unusual, if not chilling, to have a president so regularly suing so many different outlets and journalists, even when they are doing interviews with him and not breaking any civil, let alone criminal law. This controversial interview over at CBS included a top Trump aide relaying, quote, that Trump said, don't cut the tape, meaning his view of how it should be edited. Make sure the interview is out in full. If it's not out, we will sue your blank off. That's from his press secretary relaying what, according to the Post and other observers, was Donald Trump's demands. Some later tried to minimize it as a joke, a defense we've heard before, but one that cuts less ice when Donald Trump has sued so many places, outlets, tech companies, journalists. And remember, in normal times, when outlets get a frivolous or totally baseless suit, they tend to fight it in court. Indeed, both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are currently doing that against Trump cases. But we've seen other CEOs, and I actually have more on this in a special show tomorrow night, but we've seen other CEOs and corporate leaders just fold immediately because they're not really looking at whether their company did anything legally wrong. They just want to get out from under the attacks and pay off Trump. Then you have more action from the DOJ, the FBI searching the home of Washington Post journalists, which again can be legal, but is certainly unusual and aggressive. The agents took her phone, 2 laptops, a watch. One of the laptops, noticeably, was her personal computer, the other a work computer. And that's raised questions about whether going to use that rather extreme legal measure is the point itself, regardless of whether they actually needed the material or are using it to build a case.
Well, I think, as you articulated, we're seeing a broad attack on freedom of expression generally, not just freedom of the press, although there's been a lot of attacks on that as well. But I think what you're seeing is, attacks on comedians, attacks on politicians for speaking up, attacks on lawyers for representing their clients, you name it, across the board. And what you also have, as you alluded to, is that you have a lot of business executives who are simply afraid to speak up for fear of reprisals. Essentially, their free expression has been taken away as well, because they know that if they do speak up and even advocate for the policies that they believe in, that they will suffer consequences for doing that if the proposals that they recommend run counter to the policies of the administration.
Have you ever seen it this bad on the government versus First Amendment in your career?
I never have, but going into this second term of Donald Trump, I expected the worst, but it turns out that the worst is worse than I expected.
When you look at the search of the home, reading from the New York Times reporting about, again, the post where you were, exceedingly rare to search a reporter's home, they know. There is a 1980 law that actually bars search warrants for reporters' work materials unless the reporters themselves are suspected of committing a crime related to them. I'll mention, Marty, and you can opine on this. Some of our viewers know, many probably don't. I practiced First Amendment law before this job. When you represent journalists, you're representing their freedom to do their job. Obviously, there are journalists somewhere who might have crashed a car, done drunk driving in their off time, just like a doctor could make a mistake. And being investigated for that is fine. That law and other protections are designed not to give journalists some, total immunity, but to make sure that the government isn't abusing investigative powers to retaliate against their journalism. How do you weigh that in the Post's case? Are you concerned about it? And the Amazon elephant in the room, do you think Jeff Bezos is in a position to stand up for these reporters the way other publishers have in the past? I'm not talking about ideology. I'm talking about this red line, or not necessarily.
Well, I do think this is a very dangerous act on the part of the federal government. I think it signals that the Trump administration will put no limits whatsoever on its aggressions against the press. Trump, way back in 2022, during a couple of rallies, he talked about wanting to put journalists in jail for publishing leaks of national security information. He said that then when they were incarcerated, they would meet their bride, as he put it, and that then they would be willing to divulge their secrets. So really suggesting that they should be subjected to sexual assault in prison as a way of forcing them to reveal their sources. This is an effort on the part of the administration to not only intimidate journalists, but to intimidate their sources. This administration is completely obsessed with leaks, particularly out of the Defense Department. The Secretary of Defense, or as he likes to call himself, Secretary of War, is obsessed with the leaks. And this action against the Washington Post reporter is, in fact, unprecedented. It's the first time that the government has raided a reporter's home as part of a national security investigation. And so I am very concerned about what they've done. With respect to the owner, Jeff Bezos, yes, I would like to see him speak up forcefully about this. He hasn't. I mean, the editor of the Washington Post, a successor of mine, put out a very good statement, and I'm glad that he did, and I think that was reassuring. On the other hand, I think the statement that was put out by the publisher was tepid and timid, and I think the editorial page, his comments on this, their editorial, fell into that category as well. Very, very tepid, very timid, and by the way, very short. I actually searched the other day on ChatGPT for unusually short editorials in the Washington Post, and number one on the list was their own editorial about this subject. I think they should be much more forceful in confronting the administration about this, and I would love to see Jeff Bezos lead that. Whether he can do that, he can do it, but I suspect that he's fearful of reprisals. Amazon has a lot of contracts with the federal government. Blue Origin, his space company, has contracts with the federal government and would like to have more. And so I think he would just like to stay out of the picture and avoid any direct confrontation with Donald Trump.